It's rather strange being back here today because this is where I met my wife, my best friend, and found my calling, all within a very short space of time, one another. So I've fond memories of here, and one of the memories, of course, is of Bev laughing his socks off because we got something wrong when we were singing the Boar's Head Carol. And I remember him collapsing in laughter, and of course, once he collapsed, everybody else collapsed. And that's a memory that stays with me and is always kind of resounds in this building of so many memories, ghosts and memories. Well, it's customary when telling the story of a person's life, like any story, to start at the beginning and then work through to the end. But today I want to start at the end, because how Bev dealt with the devastating news of his inoperable cancer defines the man we're here to remember and give thanks for today. When the medical staff came into the room, grim-faced and sad, expressing their sorrow for the bad news they just delivered him, Bev responded, typical Bev, with cheer and good humour. He said, "Don't worry about me. I know where I'm going. It's you lot I feel sorry for. You're stuck with this Labour government." Now, that was no flip answer. I think you have to understand that. That's not Bev trying to put a brave face on things. He genuinely meant it with every fibre of his being. He was not afraid to die. He had a deep and abiding trust in Jesus, and he believed with all his heart that what Jesus said, he meant, and what he promised, he would deliver on. "I am the resurrection and the life, and all those who believe in me, even though they die, yet shall they live." Shall they live? And so Bev was genuinely looking forward to being with God. And death was just the door by which he had to go through in order to get there. And the sooner the better. And so for the 44 years I've known him, he's never ever wavered in that belief. Which is why I find him such an inspiration. Well, going back to the beginning, because we have to start there at some stage. Bev had a happy childhood growing up in Three Crosses. He was born accidentally, but we won't hold him for that. His parents were Wilfred and Rona, and he had a younger sister, Lindsay. Bev was very close to his mum, and so you can imagine the utter devastation of losing her when he was just 8 years old. Just imagine how terrible that was, the shock, the heartache he must have felt. And I know it took him many years to reach a place of peace, but he did reach that place. And then at 16 and a half, Bev made a decision that he was never, ever to regret. In fact, he always said it was one of the best things that he ever did. He joined the army. Well, in fact, he joined, REMI. Let's get that right. The Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers. And REMI gave him a sense of belonging, a great education, incredible comrades, and a self-discipline that was to stay with him for the rest of his life. It helped form his character, and it built in him a very strong work ethic. In the army, in the REMI, he met people from all sorts of backgrounds, and although it has to be said he was close to everyone in his unit, he was particularly close to his friend Joe Temple, a Scotsman. Together they formed a close bond as Celts when everybody else was English. And they were closer than brothers. And I know just how devastated Joe is that he, because of his own health issues, he is unable to make the trip from Scotland to be here to say goodbye to his friend. Well, in the army, as well as basic training, Bev did his apprenticeship as a motor mechanic, learning welding, basic blacksmithy work, and how to make, do and mend in situations where vehicles need to be up and running as quickly as possible. As well as Cyprus, he did 2 stints in Londonderry, where he was expected to carry a gun at all times, a gun that he did once or twice have to fire. He was shot at by IRA snipers, had to repair a vehicle and enemy fire, and once narrowly escaped a bullet that went through the front windscreen of the Jeep he was driving. Living under such constant threats of death forms bonds that can never be broken. And I know Bev continued to retain very close links with his unit after his discharge. He was chaplain to the Arborfield Old Boys Association, and we'd be so very pleased that some of his old comrades are able to be here today. Thank you, gentlemen, for making long journeys to be part of today. And I know how very grateful Cher is that Egon tasked us here to representing Bev's old college in Arborfield College to read the college collect at the end. Thank you, Egon. Meanwhile, another life-changing event took place in the middle of this time in memory. Bev had met a young West Country woman called Sheridan in 1970. I have to say at this point, it was always very confusing to me because he was Beverly and she was Sheridan, and it took me a long time to sort of know which one was which. So Cher will do. That's with a S, not with a C. S-H-E-R. And now he had somebody, well, it was I have to say, first of all, it was quite a whirlwind romance because they met in 1970 and they were married towards the end of the year. And he now had someone to share his life with, although it would not have been easy for Cher, a young wife, and she must have been very worried whether he would actually come home in one piece after his stints in Northern Ireland in particular. Well, after 10 years, Bev left the army in 1975, and he and Cher initially moved to a rented farmhouse in the Gower, where Bev got a job working in a local garage, and then went on to apply and got a job working for BP, where he spent 6 happy years buying a house here in Clydach. And it was during this time that Bev really came to faith. He had previously been involved in the Garrison Church when he was stationed in Osnabrück Barracks in Germany. It was there he actually felt the first strong stirrings of a call to the ministry. But of course, being under contract with the army, he couldn't respond to it immediately. But the chaplain, a wise man, advised Bev to put it on the back burner until his time with the army was over. His advice was this: if God has indeed called you, then that sense of calling will not diminish, but increase. But as Bev would admit later, although he believed in God, he regularly attended worship, there was still something missing. Cher by then was working in a bookshop in the Uplands, and a work colleague who was a Christian had spoken to her about her faith and encouraged Cher to read a book called Liberation of Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey. And this helped not only Cher to come to faith, but 3 days later, Bev came along as well. Meanwhile, my wife, Hazel, got to know Bev and Cher and joined their Bible study along with Sue Southwick, who just read, who had herself become a Christian whilst in university in London. Like Bev and Cher, I started out as a nominal churchgoer, but doing a Bible study series on Romans with them, and especially after reading, you got it, Liberation of Planet Earth, I too committed my life to Christ, followed 2 months later by my wife Hazel, who went forward at a Selwyn Hughes rally in the Bramwell Hall, with all of us sitting down and watching her make that trip up the front. That Bible study produced 3 ordinands for the church in Wales: Bev, Sue and myself. And Clydach later went on to produce 2 further ordinands in the church in Wales, Mark Previtt and of course Howell Griffiths. So this parish has done great service. Well, it depends your viewpoint, I suppose, but great service to the church in Wales, so we've always been grateful. Now, Bev played guitar. He had a fine voice, and so he and Cher with Sue formed a worship group called Grapevine, which was later joined by others, including Hazel and myself, performing both here and in local churches. But soon, however, that call for the ministry came back, as the chaplain had wisely said, came back stronger. And after initially training here as a lay reader, Bev was accepted for ordination, and he and Cher went all the way up to Birmingham to Queen's College to train. After that, being assigned a curacy in Oystermouth, followed by Morriston. And it was in Oystermouth that Bev got involved in a sponsored bike ride that went all the way from John O'Groats all the way down to Mumbles. And he did that to raise funds for the renovation of Norton Church and the community centre. And it did raise a lot of money. But the exhaustion that followed, plus the lack of recovery time afterwards, laid Bev open to infection, and he contracted ME, which was to remain with him for the rest of his ordained ministry, causing him at times extreme tiredness, exhaustion, and debilitating weakness. But here we come back to the ME training. He kept going. He kept going. You don't stop. You keep on going. And he did. After Morriston, Bev was made rector of the parish of Cefn-Coed with Faena and Nantddu near Merthyr. Nantddu was by this time closed, and Faena was well on the way with just 4 or 5 people attending every Sunday. The expectation was very low. The Bev was ready to go up there, spend a few years overseeing the closure of Faena and just try to stabilise Cefn-Coed and put it on an even footing. But Bev, for the second time in his life, fell in love. He fell in love. He fell in love with the place and its people. And he went on to spend 26 years becoming closely involved with the local communities, the schools and the hospital, when he was part-time chaplain to the ITU and the special baby care unit. He also served 3 mayors as their chaplain. At the time of his retirement, Faena was flourishing, and the parish not only regularly paid its way, which, if you know anything about the Church of Wales, is a big deal at this time, but they all took a very active part in the work life of the diocese, going up to all the events organised by the cathedral and by the diocese. And I can't really put into words just how much Bev supported, 100% by share, invested himself in the parish. He spent himself for the parish. As he prayed for his people, he walked beside them in life and death, in good times and in bad, weddings, funerals, baptisms, Sunday and midweek worship, and other special events, school assemblies, hospital visitation, and even family occasions. He took his ordination vows with utmost seriousness and became the pastor and teacher that they desperately needed. He loved to open the scriptures and put across what God had said to them in a down-to-earth, often humorous fashion, which was his trademark. And I think it's a measure of how much the parish and his people meant to Bev that he prayed for them daily right up to the end. And with the communion of saints, he's no doubt still praying for them now. Just before his retirement, Bev, by then a canon in Airdrie for 15 years, was given Penderyn with Ystrefell and Pontypridd on top of his already busy parish. And although he naturally opened his heart to them as well, by then his health was on a severe downward slide, and just after 8 months there, he felt forced to retire. And I know how much Bev and Cher very much look forward to returning to Clydach, and I know that Bev was thrilled to be able, in the beginning, to help there for a few years, covering services and giving them the support he could. But sadly, again, his health worsened and he had to stand down. By then, his health was in a bad state, causing angina, and eventually necessitating a very risky and very rare 6-way bypass, almost unheard of. This gave him about 6 extra years. But of course, in the end, he was blindsided by his cancer diagnosis. Now, given Bev's health issues, I forgot to mention his back problems, several very serious operations in his back. Given that and his ME and his heart problems and the struggles he went along the way, you'd be forgiven thinking that Bev must have been continually miserable. And you could not be further from the truth. He had a mischievous sense of humour that went from barely disguised sniggers to loud laughs very quickly. He would joke with the bishop, the dean and fellow canons before entering the cathedral on some auspicious occasion, and his wide grin could be seen even under that large overhanging Edwardian moustache, which used to kind of go up when he laughed sometimes. He was all full of quips and funny comments, with poor Cher being the butt of so many of his jokes. In fact, he had so many nicknames. I'll give you a couple of nicknames now. He used to call her things like Bird, Maid, chicken legs. My favourite, Spangle of the Universe. And latterly, the Gestapo. Even in the last weeks of his illness, meetings with friends would break into laughter as he made some comment or other about shared memories. We would go to try and lift his spirits and come away found that he lifted ours. The best way to describe Bev, I think, was that he was a 2-year-old trapped in an adult body. And he never grew up. Never, ever grew up. And my children, and I'm sure others who knew him, will always remember Bev's ability to get down to their level and do all the kinds of silly things that were beneath everybody else's dignity. And his last weeks were smattered with laughter. But towards the end, from the moment he got the dreaded diagnosis, I think it was Bev's faith that really shone through. Even as the outward body became thinner and weaker and almost translucent in the end, his faith shone brighter and brighter. St. Paul saying from 2 Corinthians 4 verse 7, I think was never more true. We're speaking about the life of Christ and the Christian. Paul writes, we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. And Bev would say amen to that. Bev's faith has been such a blessing over the years, not least to us, his friends, but also to his beloved parishioners. He had a stock of favourite sayings which he would use to constantly encourage those who needed it. Like, if you were having a problem, he'd say, pray about it. Or another time he said, God knows. Or more recently, God will handle it. That particularly as he faced his final illness. And these were not mere pious cliches or mindless aphorisms. Bev believed them implicitly. And what's more, he lived them. He lived them in his own experience. What he was outside, he was inside. He was a man for God. And so today, Cher's lost a husband, Lindsay a brother, Joe, Sue, Hazel, myself, and many others, a good and dear friend, his beloved unit, a comrade in arms, and the church, a devoted and faithful servant. Rest in peace, Bev. You're home now.